All right, so it's just 1 week away
From the election.
from the election.
Oh.
And things are getting really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we've got VP Harris
Facing off against...
going up against former President Trump, already a historic rematch. But then you add in President Biden dropping out back in July.
Wow.
And, well, it's anybody's game at this point.
Absolutely. It's a situation with incredibly high stakes.
Yeah.
And every move from the campaigns is being scrutinized, I think.
Exactly. Which is why we are diving into this piece from the Washington Post all about a pivotal Harris rally that just took place. Now, rallies are, standard fare in any election.
Right.
But this one, well, it has some layers to unpack.
That's right. It wasn't just where the rally took place, but when and how the Harris campaign used both to their advantage.
Right.
This wasn't just a speech. It was a carefully crafted performance designed to send a very specific message in the final days of the campaign.
Okay, so let's break it down. First, the where. This rally was held at the Ellipse in Washington, D.C., the same spot where the January 6th insurrection happened.
Right.
I'm already sensing some strategic symbolism at play here. What do you think?
It's impossible to ignore the symbolism, right? This location instantly elevates the stakes. It's a visual reminder of the fragility of democracy and the potential consequences of political extremism. By choosing this location, Harris is directly confronting the events of that day and framing the election as a choice between two very different visions for the future of America.
It's a bold move, that's for sure. It forces voters to remember that day and confront the emotions it evokes. So talk to me about the scene itself. What kind of vibe did the article describe?
Think less about a typical partisan rally and more about a patriotic gathering. The article described a sea of American flags, huge crowds, and a palpable energy in the air. It was less about red versus blue and more about a shared sense of national identity.
Interesting. It sounds like they were deliberately trying to create a sense of unity,
Yes.
even as they were drawing a stark contrast between Harris and Trump.
Exactly. And that contrast was central to Harris's message. She painted a very clear picture of Trump as someone obsessed with revenge, someone who is fundamentally unstable and a threat to democracy. And she didn't just throw these terms around lightly, she backed them up with concrete examples.
Like what? Give me some specifics.
Well, she pointed to Trump's continued efforts to undermine the legitimacy of the 2020 election and his ongoing attempts to overturn the results in various states.
Right.
She also highlighted his rhetoric, his attacks on democratic institutions, and his encouragement of violence among his supporters.
Wow.
And then there's the enemies list.
Ah, yes, the infamous enemies list. Explain that one for our listener.
It's a powerful rhetorical device that Harris used to differentiate herself from Trump. She talked about her to-do list for the American people,
Okay.
which includes practical concerns like addressing the economy, healthcare, and immigration reform.
Right.
And then she contrasted that with Trump's enemies list, all the people and institutions he perceives as standing in his way. It's a way of painting him as vindictive and obsessed with power, while she's focused on the needs of everyday Americans.
It's a smart strategy for sure.
Yeah.
It appeals to voters' desire for a leader who is focused on solving problems, not settling scores.
Right.
But I'm curious, did she actually delve into the specifics of her to-do list? Did she offer concrete policy proposals?
Yes, she did.
Yeah.
For instance, on the economy, she outlined plans to create jobs in renewable energy,
Okay.
provide tax breaks for small businesses, and invest in infrastructure. On healthcare, she discussed expanding access to affordable care and lowering prescription drug costs. And on immigration, she advocated for a pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants and increased border security measures.
So she wasn't just speaking in broad strokes. She actually gave voters a glimpse of what a Harris presidency might look like in terms of policy. That's important because it helps to ground her message in reality and make it more relatable to voters who are concerned about their day-to-day lives.
Absolutely. Voters need to see how these abstract threats to democracy translate into tangible impacts on their lives.
Right.
And Harris clearly understands that.
But let's get back to the January 6th element. You mentioned earlier that Harris directly confronted the events of that day. How did she do that? And what was the effect?
Well, the article described a particularly powerful moment where she points to the White House, looming large behind her, and directly addresses Trump's actions. She reminds the crowd that he's the person who stood on that very spot and incited a mob to attack the Capitol.
Wow, that's a chilling image.
Yeah.
I can practically feel the tension in that moment.
The article described it as electrifying. It was a clear and direct challenge to Trump's narrative about January 6th. A reminder of the violence and chaos that ensued, and a warning about the potential consequences of a second Trump term.
It's a risky move, but also incredibly powerful.
Mm.
It forces voters to confront the reality of what happened and consider the implications for the future.
Right, and it's not just about attacking Trump. It's about drawing a clear distinction between herself and him. She's positioning herself as the defender of democracy, the one who will protect American institutions and values.
Okay, so she's painting a pretty bleak picture of a potential Trump presidency. But how is she trying to win over voters who might be disillusioned with both sides?
Right.
Where does her message of unity fit into all of this?
That's where things get really interesting. Because despite her strong condemnation of Trump, she also repeatedly emphasizes the need for unity and healing. She even directly addressed the potential contradiction in her message,
Yeah.
saying that she believes in listening to those who disagree with her and giving them a seat at the table.
It's a tricky balancing act for sure.
It is.
But it's also a critical one if she wants to appeal to voters who are tired of the partisan bickering and division. Did the article give any indication of how the crowd responded to this message of unity?
Yes, the article described the crowd as receptive to her message of unity, with
Okay.
many cheering and applauding. But it also acknowledged the deep divisions that exist in the country, suggesting that it's unclear whether this message will resonate with a broader audience.
It's a gamble, that's for sure.
It is.
But it's one that might just pay off, especially if she can effectively connect her message of unity to concrete policies and actions that address the real concerns of voters. But before we get into that, there's one more element of this rally that we need to unpack: the storytelling. The article mentioned that the campaign strategically used ordinary Americans to share their personal stories.
Yes.
Tell me more about that. What kind of stories did they share? And what was the intended effect?
Well, they brought out a diverse group of people, a couple affected by Texas's abortion ban, the brother of a Capitol police officer who died after January 6th, and even Republican voters who had switched allegiances to Harris. They each shared their personal experiences, highlighting the real-world impact of the issues at stake in the election.
Wow, that's powerful stuff. And it speaks to the emotional core of this campaign. It's not just about abstract political debates. It's about real people, real lives being affected by the decisions of our leaders.
Exactly. And by sharing these personal stories, the campaign is trying to create an emotional connection with voters,
Yeah.
one that transcends party lines and speaks to shared values and concerns.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the symbolism of the location, the contrast between Harris and Trump, the message of unity, and the power of storytelling. It's clear that this rally was carefully crafted to deliver a specific message and appeal to a broad audience. But I'm curious, did the article mention anything about how this rally fits into the broader campaign strategy in these final days before the election?
Yeah. That's a great question, and one that we'll delve into in the next part of our deep dive. We'll explore the strategic implications of this rally, how it's being interpreted by political analysts, and what it might tell us about the state of the race as we head into the final week.
Ooh, I can't wait to unpack all of that. Stay tuned, folks, as we continue our deep dive into this pivotal moment in the 2024 election.
Picking up where we left off, this rally wasn't just about delivering a powerful message.
Right.
It was also about timing and strategy.
Huh?
Choosing to hold this event in Washington, D.C. just days before the election, well, that's not a typical campaign stop.
You're right. Usually candidates are frantically crisscrossing those battleground states
Yeah.
in the final stretch. So what's the thinking behind this D.C. play?
It signals a couple of things.
Okay.
First, it elevates Harris to a national stage, aiming for a wider audience than just swing state voters. It's projecting an image of leadership, someone ready to tackle the big issues facing the entire country.
It's like she's already stepping into the role of president, setting the tone for potential administration.
Exactly. And second, holding it so close to the election creates this sense of urgency, reminding voters of the high stakes and encouraging them to get out there and vote.
It's a calculated risk. If the turnout was low or the message didn't resonate, it could have backfired big time.
Absolutely. But the article suggests they achieved what they set out to do.
Yeah.
The visual of those massive crowds, the energy, it all feeds into that crucial momentum heading into Election Day.
Speaking of visuals, something that stood out to me in the article was the emphasis on patriotism rather than partisan politics.
Right.
They described all those American flags, the USA chants. It almost felt like a 4th of July celebration.
That was no accident. The Harris campaign carefully constructed that imagery to draw a sharp contrast with Trump's divisive rhetoric.
Right.
It's all about associating Harris with a unified, hopeful vision of America.
It's fascinating how much strategy goes into these seemingly spontaneous moments in a campaign. It's like a carefully choreographed performance designed to sway public opinion.
Precisely. And the symbolism goes even deeper. By choosing the ellipse, the site of the January 6th attack, Harris is reclaiming that space and reframing the narrative around it.
What's fascinating to me is how Trump and his supporters have tried to downplay, even rewrite.
Uh-huh.
What happened that day, the article mentions Trump recently calling it a day of love, which feels like a very deliberate attempt to erase the violence and the threat to democracy.
It absolutely is, but by holding the rally at the Ellipse,
Right.
Harris is visually connecting her message back to the reality of that day, forcing voters to confront it.
It's like she's saying, we can't just pretend this didn't happen. We have to learn from it and choose a different path.
Exactly. And she's not just targeting Trump supporters with this message, she's also speaking to those who might be disillusioned with both sides. Those who are tired of the constant fighting and negativity. She's saying, I'm different. I offer a way forward.
It's an appeal to hope to a better future.
Yes.
But is that enough to overcome the deep divisions in this country? The article even cited a poll showing that fewer Republicans blame Trump for the violence on January 6th as time goes by.
That's a sobering reminder of the challenges she faces.
Yeah.
It's a tough task to convince those who are still sympathetic to Trump that he represents a real danger to democracy.
So how does she do it? How does she break through the partisan noise and reach those voters?
I think that's where the personal stories we talked about earlier come in, by bringing those ordinary Americans to the stage. She's putting a human face on the consequences of Trump's actions and rhetoric.
It's about connecting on an emotional level, going beyond the talking points and the political jargon.
Exactly, and by placing those stories within the context of the Ellipse, with the White House looming in the background, the campaign is creating a powerful visual and emotional narrative that's hard to ignore.
It's about showing the human cost of political extremism, the real-life impact on families and communities.
Right, and it's about reminding voters that this election isn't just about abstract political ideas. It's about choosing a leader who will protect our institutions and safeguard our future.
Okay, so we've talked about the symbolism, the storytelling, the strategic timing of this rally. But there's another piece of this puzzle that we need to examine. President Biden's garbage comment.
Ah, yes, that definitely complicates things. Remember, Biden, on a separate call with Latino voters, called Trump supporters garbage
Right.
in response to some offensive comments made at a Trump rally.
Yeah, it's hard to reconcile that kind of language with Harris's message of unity. I mean, it feeds into the very division she's trying to overcome.
It does, and the article points out the tension between appealing to the base and trying to win over undecided voters.
Right.
Was it a gaffe, a calculated move to energize core supporters? It's hard to say.
It definitely adds a layer of complexity to the analysis of this rally and its impact.
It does, and it raises the question, can a message of unity truly resonate in such a polarized political climate?
It's the million-dollar question. But what's fascinating is that the Harris campaign didn't shy away from addressing this tension.
You're right. Instead of ignoring it, they leaned into it.
Oh, okay.
They used it as an opportunity to reiterate their commitment to civility and respectful dialogue, even when faced with opposition.
So it's about acknowledging the reality of the division while still striving for something better.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that unity doesn't mean agreeing on everything.
Right.
It means finding common ground, even amidst disagreement, and working together to solve the challenges facing our country.
It's a lofty goal,
Hmm?
but one that feels increasingly necessary in our current political climate. But, all this talk about unity and symbolism is great, but at the end of the day, it all comes down to the numbers.
You're right. We can't ignore the data. And the article mentioned some early voting data that seemed to show strong Republican turnout. What's the Harris campaign saying about that?
Well, they're downplaying it, of course. They're saying it's mostly reliable Republican voters casting their ballots early, not necessarily a sign of surging support for Trump. But honestly, it's hard to know what to make of those numbers at this point.
It is, and that's what makes this final week of the campaign so crucial. Every rally, every interview, every tweet could sway those undecided voters who are still up for grabs.
So it's a nail-biter for sure.
It is.
But let's zoom out for a moment and think about the bigger picture here.
Yeah.
What does this rally and this election tell us about the state of American democracy?
That's a profound question. I think it highlights the deep divisions that exist in our society, divisions that have been exacerbated by political polarization and the rise of social media.
It feels like we're constantly bombarded with misinformation and just plain noise. It's hard to know what to believe or who to trust.
And that's exactly what makes campaigns like this one so challenging. It's not just about presenting policy positions. It's about cutting through the clutter and connecting with voters on an emotional level.
It's about telling a story.
Yeah.
A story that resonates with people's hopes and fears, their values and aspirations.
Precisely. And the story that wins this election will likely shape the direction of our country for years to come.
So what does this all mean? What's the key takeaway from our deep dive into this Harris rally?
Well, I think it reminds us that democracy is a fragile thing, constantly being tested and challenged. It requires active participation, critical thinking, and a willingness to engage in civil discourse, even when it's difficult.
It's about listening to each other, understanding different perspectives, and finding common ground even when we disagree.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing the power of symbolism, storytelling, and emotional appeals in shaping our political landscape.
Wow, that's a lot to ponder as we head into this final week of the election. Any final thoughts to leave our listener with?
I'd encourage you to reflect on the role of symbolism in political campaigns.
Okay.
How do candidates use imagery, location, and language to evoke certain emotions and convey their messages? And how can we as informed citizens critically analyze those symbols and messages to make informed decisions?
That's a great challenge to leave our listener with. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Remember, stay informed, stay engaged, and most importantly, get out there and vote. So we're talking about symbolism and unity and even gaffes, but now I think we got to get down to brass tacks.
Yeah.
What about those early voting numbers the article mentioned?
Yeah.
Strong Republican turnout, that could mean trouble for Harris, right?
It's definitely something to keep an eye on, but remember, campaigns are masters of spin.
Right.
The Harris camp is suggesting it's mainly a shift in voting habits, not a surge of new Trump supporters.
So basically they're saying it's the usual Republican voters just showing up earlier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're arguing it doesn't necessarily reflect a change in overall voter sentiment.
Okay, but let's play devil's advocate for a second. What if those numbers are a sign of something bigger?
Yeah.
What if Trump is actually gaining ground in these final days?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's why this last week is so crucial.
Yeah.
Every single event, every interview, even a tweet could sway those undecided voters.
It's all about momentum, isn't it?
Yeah.
And how voters perceive which way the wind is blowing.
Precisely. And that's where the choice of the ellipse for this rally becomes even more intriguing.
Okay, I'm following you. Explain that connection.
Think about it. By holding this big event in D.C.,
Yeah.
Harris is essentially bypassing those traditional battleground states.
Yeah?
It's a bold move that suggests confidence, maybe even a sense that they're playing on a different level now.
It's like they're saying, we're not just fighting for a few swing states, we're fighting for the soul of the nation.
Exactly. And that message might resonate with those undecided voters who are looking for something more than just the usual partisan back and forth.
It's about appealing to a sense of shared purpose, a desire for something bigger than just winning an election.
Right. And that's where the symbolism of the ellipse, the imagery of unity, the personal stories, it all comes together to create a compelling narrative that transcends the typical political divide.
It's fascinating how campaigns have become so sophisticated in their use of symbolism and storytelling.
Right.
It's not just about policy positions anymore.
Yeah.
It's about crafting an emotional connection with voters.
Absolutely. And this Harris rally is a prime example of that. It was carefully designed to evoke specific emotions, to create a sense of urgency and hope, and to ultimately persuade voters to choose her vision for the future.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into this pivotal moment in the 2024 election, what's the key takeaway for our listener? What should they be thinking about as we head into these final days?
I'd say this rally and this entire election cycle highlight a fundamental truth about American democracy.
Right.
It's a constant work in progress, a delicate balance that requires vigilance and active participation from all of us.
It's not just about casting a vote every 4 years.
Yeah.
It's about staying informed, engaging in thoughtful discussion, and holding our leaders accountable.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing the power of symbols, stories, and emotions in shaping our political landscape. We need to be critical thinkers, discerning consumers of information, and active participants in the democratic process.
That's a powerful message to leave our listener with. So as we head into the final days of this historic election, remember to stay engaged, stay informed, and most importantly, make your voice heard. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Good evening, America! Good evening, everyone. Good evening, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy lives listen, 1 week from today, you will have the chance to make a decision that directly impacts your life, the life of your family, and the future of this country we love. And it will probably be the most important vote you ever cast. And this election is more than just a choice between two parties and two different candidates. It is a choice about whether we have a country rooted in freedom for every American or ruled by chaos and division. Many of you watching have probably already cast your ballots. But I know many others are still considering who to vote for, or whether you'll vote at all. So tonight, I will speak to everyone about the choice and the stakes in this election. Look, we know who Donald Trump is. He is the person who stood at this very spot nearly 4 years ago and sent an armed mob to the United States Capitol to overturn the will of the people in a free and fair election. An election that he knew he lost. Americans died as a result of that attack. 140 law enforcement officers were injured because of that attack. And while Donald Trump sat in the White House watching as the violence unfolded on television, he was told by his staff that the mob wanted to kill his own vice president. And Donald Trump responded with 2 words: "So what?" America, that's who Donald Trump is. And that's who is asking you to give him another 4 years in the Oval Office. Not to focus on your problems, but to focus on his. And Donald Trump has told us his priorities for a second term. He has an enemies list of people he intends to prosecute. He says that one of his highest priorities is to set free the violent extremists who insulted those law enforcement officers on January 6th. Donald Trump intends to use the United States military against American citizens who simply disagree with him. People he calls, quote, the enemy from within. America, this is not a candidate for president who is thinking about how to make your life better. This is someone who is unstable, obsessed with revenge, consumed with grievance, and out for unchecked power. Donald Trump has spent a decade trying to keep the American people divided and afraid of each other. That is who he is. But America, I am here tonight to say that is not who we are. That is not who we are. That is not who we are. You see, what Donald Trump has never understood is that e pluribus unum, out of many, one, isn't just a phrase on a dollar bill. It is a living truth about the heart of our nation. Our democracy doesn't require us to agree on everything. In fact, we like good arguments from time to time. Just think of your own family, right? It's not the American way to not have disagreements. We don't shy away from robust debate. In fact, we like a good debate, don't we? We like a good debate. And the fact that someone disagrees with us does not make them the enemy within. They are family, neighbors, classmates, co-workers. They are fellow Americans. And as Americans, we rise and fall together. America, for too long, we have been consumed with too much division, chaos, and mutual distrust. And it can be easy then to forget a simple truth. It doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. It is time to stop pointing fingers. We have to stop pointing fingers and start locking arms. It is time to turn the page on the drama and the conflict, the fear and division. It is time for a new generation of leadership in America. And I am ready to offer that leadership as the next President of the United States of America. Now look, let me say, I recognize this has not been a typical campaign. Even though I've had the honor of serving as your vice president for the last 4 years, I know that many of you are still getting to know who I am. Well, let me tell you, I am someone who has spent most of my career outside of Washington, D.C., so I know that not all the good ideas come from here. I am not afraid of tough fights against bad actors and powerful interests, because for decades, as a prosecutor and a top law enforcement officer of our biggest state, I won fights against big banks that ripped off homeowners, against for-profit colleges that scammed veterans and students, against predators who abused women and children, and cartels that trafficked in guns, drugs, and human beings. And I did this work because for as long as I can remember, I have always had an instinct to protect. There's something about people being treated unfairly or overlooked that frankly just gets to me. I don't like it. It's what my mother instilled in me, a drive to hold accountable those who use their wealth or power to take advantage of other people. The drive to protect hardworking Americans who aren't always seen or heard and deserve a voice, and I will tell you that is the kind of president I will be. And look, I'll be honest with you, I'm not perfect, I make mistakes, but here's what I promise you. I will always listen to you, even if you don't vote for me. I will always tell you the truth, even if it is difficult to hear. I will work every day to build consensus and reach compromise to get things done. And if you give me the chance to fight on your behalf, there is nothing in the world that will stand in my way. So look, in less than 90 days, either Donald Trump or I will be in the Oval Office. Okay? On day one, if elected, Donald Trump would walk into that office with an enemies list. When elected, I will walk in with a to-do list full of priorities of what I will get done for the American people. And I will work with everyone, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, to help Americans who are working hard and still struggling to get ahead. I have been honored to serve as Joe Biden's vice president. But I will bring my own experiences and ideas to the Oval Office. My presidency will be different because the challenges we face are different. Our top priority as a nation 4 years ago was to end the pandemic and rescue the economy. Now, our biggest challenge is to lower costs that were rising even before the pandemic and that are still too high. I get it. I still remember our mother sitting at that yellow Formica table, late at night, cup of tea in hand, a pile of bills in front of her, trying to make it all work. And I've heard from so many of you who are facing even greater financial pressures. Donald Trump's answer to you is the same as it was the last time. Another $1 trillion in tax cuts for billionaires and big corporations. And this time, he will pay for it with a 20% national sales tax on everything you buy that is imported. Think about it. Clothes, food, toys, cell phones. A Trump sales tax that would cost the average family nearly $4,000 more a year. And on top of that, you will pay even more if Donald Trump finally gets his way and repeals the Affordable Care Act, which would throw millions of Americans off their health insurance and take us back to when insurance companies had the power to deny people with pre-existing conditions. Well, we are not going back. We are not going back. We are not going back because we also know Donald Trump would deliver tax cuts to his billionaire donors. I will deliver tax cuts to working people and the middle class. I will make sure you have a chance not just to get by, but to get ahead. Because I believe in honoring the dignity of work. I will enact the first ever federal ban on price gouging on groceries, cap the price of insulin, and limit out-of-pocket prescription costs for all Americans. I will fight to make sure that hardworking Americans can actually afford a place to live. I'll never forget how our mother saved up and how excited she was when she could finally afford to buy our first home. I remember how excited she was. And I know that owning a home is not only a measure of financial security, it's about the pride of your hard work. And as president, I will fight to help first-time home buyers with your down payment, take on the companies that are jacking up rents, and build millions of new homes. For years, we have heard excuses about why America can't build enough housing. Enough with the excuses. I'm going to cut the red tape and work with the private sector and local governments to speed up building and get it done. And the cost of housing isn't the only financial pressure on middle-class families. I have met so many young people who have a natural desire to parent their children well, but not always the resources to do it. So I'll fight for a child tax credit to save them some money, which will also lift American children out of worked to lower the cost of childcare, which is out of reach for too many working families today. And for too many people in the sandwich generation who are raising young children and taking care of a parent, juggling all of it is extremely difficult. You know, I took care of my mother when she got sick, cooking food that she had a taste for, finding clothes that would not irritate her skin, and understand, as I do, that caregiving is about dignity. It is about dignity. And currently, if you need home care and you don't have some money to hire someone, you and your family need to deplete your savings to qualify for help. That's just not right. So we're going to change the approach and allow Medicare to cover the cost of home care so seniors can get the help and care they need in their own homes. Now, Donald Trump has a different approach. He tried to cut Medicare and Social Security every year he was president. Look, I believe that when people have worked hard their entire life, they deserve to retire with the benefits they have earned. And I believe in the fundamental freedom of Americans to make decisions about their own bodies and not have their government tell them what to do. I will fight to restore what Donald Trump and his hand-selected Supreme Court justices took away from the women of America. That today, 1 in 3 women in America, think about it, 1 in 3 women in America lives in a state with a Trump abortion ban, many with no exceptions even for rape and incest. The idea that a woman who survives a crime of a violation to her body should not have the authority to make a decision about what happens to her body next, that is immoral. That is immoral, and Trump's not done. He would ban abortion nationwide, restrict access to birth control and put IVF treatments at risk, and force states to monitor women's pregnancies. Just Google Project 2025 and read the plans for yourself. And look, I think we all know one does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to simply agree the government should not be telling her what to do with her body. Not the government. And when Congress passes a bill to restore reproductive freedom nationwide, as President of the United States, I will proudly sign it into law. Proudly. And look, on another subject, politicians have got to stop treating immigration as an issue to scare up votes in an election, and instead treat it as the serious challenge that it is that we must finally come together to solve. I will work with Democrats and Republicans to sign into law the border security bill that Donald Trump killed. When I was Attorney General of a border state, I saw the chaos and violence caused by transnational criminal organizations that I took on. And when I am president, we will quickly remove those who arrive here unlawfully, prosecute the cartels, and give Border Patrol the support they so desperately need. At the same time, we must acknowledge we are a nation of immigrants. And I will work with Congress to pass immigration reform, including an earned path to citizenship for hardworking immigrants like farm workers and our dreamers. As Commander-in-Chief, I will make sure America has the strongest, most lethal fighting force in the world. Donald Trump, on the other hand, has shown his contempt for our nation's heroes, calls them suckers and losers, called a 4-star Marine general a, quote, lowlife. I will always honor, never denigrate, the service and sacrifice of our troops and their families, and fulfill our sacred obligation to care for them. I will strengthen, not surrender, America's global leadership. And I will stand with our friends because I know that our alliances keep American people safe and make America stronger and more secure. Look, world leaders think that Donald Trump is an easy mark, easy to manipulate with flattery or favor. And you can believe that autocrats like Putin and Kim Jong-un are rooting for him in this election. I will always uphold our security, advance our national interest, and ensure that the United States of America remains, as we must forever be, a champion of liberty around the world. America, we know what Donald Trump has in mind. More chaos, more division, and policies that help those at the very top and hurt everyone else. I offer a different path, and I ask for your vote. And here is my pledge to you. I pledge to seek common ground and common sense solutions to make your life better. I am not looking to score political points. I am looking to make progress. I pledge to listen to experts, to those who will be impacted by the decisions I make, and to people who disagree with me. Unlike Donald Trump, I don't believe people who disagree with me are the enemy. He wants to put them in jail. I'll give them a seat at the table. I pledge to you to approach my work with the joy and optimism that comes from making a difference in people's lives. And I pledge to be a president for all Americans. And to always put country above party and self. I love our country with all my heart. And I believe in its promise because I've lived it. I grew up as a child of the Civil Rights Movement. My parents would take me to marches in a stroller, where crowds of people of all races, faiths, and walks of life came together to fight for the ideals of freedom and opportunity. I've lived the promise of America. I saw how hard our mother worked to give her daughters the same chances this country gave her. Growing up, I was blessed to have family by blood and family by love, who instilled in me the values of community, compassion, and faith that have always defined our nation at its best. I've lived the promise of America. I've spent my life fighting for the people who have been hurt and counted out, but never stopped believing that in our country, anything is possible. I've lived the promise of America. And I see the promise of America in all of you. In all of you. I see it. I see it in the young people who are voting for the first time, who are determined to live free from gun violence and to protect our planet and to shape the world they inherit. I see it in the women who refuse to accept a future without reproductive freedom, and the men who support them. I see it in Republicans who have never voted for a Democrat before, but have put the Constitution of the United States over party. I've seen it in Americans different in many respects, but united in our pursuit of freedom, our belief in fairness and decency, and our faith in a better future. America, I know the vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us. I know it. And that's why I am in this race, to fight for the people, just like I always have. Nearly 250 years ago, America was born when we wrested freedom from a petty tyrant. Across the generations, Americans have preserved that freedom, expanded it, and in so doing, proved to the world that a government of, by, and for the people is strong and can endure. And those who came before us, the patriots at Normandy and Selma, Seneca Falls and Stonewall, on farmlands and factory floors, they did not struggle, sacrifice, and lay down their lives only to see us cede our fundamental freedoms. They didn't do that only to see us submit to the will of another petty tyrant. These United States of America, we are not a vessel for the schemes of wannabe dictators. The United States of America is the greatest idea humanity ever devised. A nation big enough to encompass all our dreams, strong enough to withstand any fracture or fissure between us, and fearless enough to imagine a future of possibilities. So, America, let us reach for that future. Let us fight for this beautiful country we love. And in 7 days, we have the power, each of you has the power to turn the page and start writing the next chapter in the most extraordinary story ever told. I thank you all. God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America.